Welcome to this next event, the Post-Shield Conference event. This one is called Online Sexual Predators, Global Perspectives and Problem Solving. And basically, we're having this because there was a collaboration jam that wasn't recorded because we didn't have the permission to record. And we're just going to talk to Genevieve and Theresa and just see what the discussion was, especially around how we can approach this topic globally. And I'll kind of start with, let's define like the topic, because there a lot of talk about sextortion, online abuse, and this. So let's make sure that we're all talking about the same thing.
Yeah, so when you talk about online sexual abuse, I mean, that encompasses so many different things. It can be targeting, there's targeting for human trafficking. There's also exploitation, convincing people to send nudes or sexual videos that then they threaten to release. And the new thing that we're seeing as well with some of the AI is that people are essentially taking your photo and using AI to create nudes and sexually explicit content with it. So it kind of encompasses all of that.
Yeah, it's really a lot. And both of you and Teresa have actually different experiences and perspectives on it, which I really like. So do you want to share yours?
Sure, sure. So I have my background's in clinical forensic psychology. So I've worked more on the side with, lack of a better term, the predators, and so I've seen how that side operates. I've worked with, you know, some of the worst of the worst in supermax prisons. I've done assessments around not guilty by reason of insanity, competency to stand trial, stuff like that. So that's where more of my experiences. I've also worked with victims as well, and I'm seeing more victims now in private practice than I was before.
And is it because of an increase, do you think, in the crime? Or is it also have to do with people are more willing to talk about it? Because I'm really curious because it's been a lot in the news, a lot of awareness initiatives. So I'm wondering if you see that impacts of that as well.
hmm I mean, that's a good question. I don't know why I'm seeing. I don't know if it is the increase of it, or if people are just more comfortable coming forward and saying, "Hey, this happened to me."
I would say, I mean, we shouldn't forget that child sexual abuse has always existed in the offline capacity. And of course, it was always treated with and encouraged by groomers or sexual offenders or bad actors to maintain that whole secrecy element. And of course, the movement to online child sexual abuse, whether it's live streaming or whether it's the initial contact online that subsequently moves offline, I think that I'm really, really hoping that society as a whole has decided to break that shroud of secrecy, which unfortunately has maintained that cycle of abuse for so long. I'm sure you can collaborate on this, and I think that I think it's very, very positive that a lot of individuals are coming forward. But the problem with the way the media portrays these cases, it's usually done in a very sensational type, and a lot of survivors are uncomfortable with the media portrayal of their various cases. For example, I know we there was that we spoke the mother from the US who lost her son, a 14-year-old son, when he'd fallen irrevocably in love with the AI chatbot. But I think that, I think it's very, very important to encourage discussions, very, very important to encourage disclosure. As part of the Sessagram project, we of course worked with Snapchat and we developed a bit of a lightning campaign on the encouragement of reporting and to break that shroud of secrecy that indelibly surrounds anything to child sexual abuse, be it online or offline. And having worked with so many survivors in my various professional capacities, many of them one of their primary recommendations has always been to really push for that educational component, to encourage a lot of survivors or a lot of individuals who themselves are either experiencing child sexual abuse or some form of child sexual abuse, be it on or offline, but to talk to people and to encourage that reporting element, whether it's to a friend, whether it's to a teacher, but just to bring this matter out into the open because of that whole element of shame. And it's that victim blaming approach that has been used for so many, I would say, generations, centuries. And the survivors were very, very keen for us to really focus on it is not that the person's fault. They are being coerced into silence by these perpetrators, by these manipulative, narcissistic perpetrators, whether they be minor or over the ages of 18. In a lot of the projects that we've been working on, the average age of the perpetrator were in their 20s. So, is there a greater awareness of online abuse? To a point, but we have in parallel, the figures are quadrupling. If you look at the Internet Watch Foundation, the figures in 3 and even 2024 or early 2025, it's just quadrupled the number of online instances. So we worked with media. The media coverage needs to be very sensitive and very careful how you portray the suffering and the harm that has been inflicted on the child. So yeah, it's not an easy question to answer in the sense that it's quite subjective when you're working within this ecosystem, whether it's the child abuse ecosystem or now currently, which is very much in that digital ecosystem, whereby we see AI CSAM being generated. So we have we have the offline child sexual abuse that has unfortunately always been there. Then in within the last 10, 15 years, we've got a very high prevalence of online abuse, which doesn't necessarily involve contact, can be live streaming or whatever. And now, currently, within the last 6 months, I would say, particularly, there's been this explosive usage of AI to perpetuate more abuse, whether it's denudifying individuals. I think 40% of 13 to 18-year-olds have said that their images and their photographs have been taken and denudified with various AI tools. So we have so many elements to take into consideration that we really have to keep up with that constant, unfortunate change that AI has been thrown at us. I don't know if you agree. Sorry now. There was a lot to say, but I really think that we have to take a very pragmatic approach to what's happening. What do we need to do to preempt? And again, and I've worked a lot on preventative projects. How do we prevent this from happening? And I know that, and even prevent your clients from coming to talk to you, Jennifer.
Yeah.
We can use your expertise through educational webinars, but it's just how do we reduce, how do we alert, how do we put today's young digital decade on a very, very strong high alert of what's happened, what is happening, and what could potentially happen.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, yeah. What I want
Oh,
to
no, no,
ask
go
you,
ahead.
what about the global aspect, right? Because I would think if it's gone online, obviously it's been online, but it's significantly increasing online. Is that something that you kind of see that the victims the that they have to deal with a little bit more?
Potentially, because they don't know where the perpetrator is in some cases. Like, you have no idea. I mean, it could be the person sitting next door to you, or it could be somebody across the globe. You have no idea. And you have no idea where you're sending the money, because if you think about like sextort, well, they call it sextortion, but extorting for, hey, I won't release these photos of you. You don't know where that person is. You don't know where you're wiring the money to. So it is very much a global issue, and it's not bound by your neighborhood or, you know, your country's boundaries anymore.
Yeah,
How does that
exactly.
affect the
It's
victim? If I just an idea, not knowing who it is, where they are, does how does that affect the victim? I'm sure it has an impact.
Oh, yeah. I mean, well, it's this is going to be an oversimplified comparison. But if you think about the scariest movies are when you don't see the monster. And can you imagine being a kid? You don't know who's coming after you. And there is so much shame around sexual abuse. And there is, and Teresa touched on that, there's so much victim blaming as well. And so it's like the kid's like, I don't know who this is. I don't know who's coming after me. I don't know if it's a teacher. I don't know if it's somebody, the the stereotypical Nigerian prince, that everybody thinks is perpetrating it. They don't know. And so that's petrifying. There was the case in Kentucky, and I don't want to sensationalize it at all, but recently of the kid who was extorted for $3,000 for AI generated images, and he ended up taking his own life. So it's the shame and it's fear and shame. I mean, they're two of the biggest motivators for behavior, and you combine that in with sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, and it's a bad
Yeah,
situation.
and as you touched upon, Genevieve, it's this whole the internet is borderless. The internet, we have been, with these incredible technological developments, it's provided the good aspects, but it's provided bad actors with the ability to exploit on a global scale with with complete and utter disregard to legislation, whether it's international human rights law or European or American legislation. And it's a real wild west. I know this is a common expression employed by experts within this ecosystem, but it's a real Wild West domain that has been exploited in a very negative way by these bad actors. And the problem with this whole global component, having worked with survivors who were abused via live streaming, it's the numbers of individuals that are implicated in the abuse. It's the lack of knowledge of where they are located, or even what they are potentially doing with the images and videos that are arising from this abuse. One of the survivors that we've worked with explained how many of the abusers asked her to write their names on her body throughout the live streaming abuse process. And again, it's that re-victimizes, that creates that re-victimization for the individuals or the survivors who've been abused. And yeah, so it's quite problematic. And then on top of that, we have to add up this whole AI element, whereby, that's a very, very sad case. And unfortunately, we're seeing a rise of these sexual extortion cases where young individuals they just don't know who to turn to, and they're unfortunately taking their own lives. So where are the fundamental rights and freedoms in that? So I really think we need to reassess what our fundamental rights are. I mean, what are our human rights? And I think this certainly needs to be reflected within the legislative frameworks throughout the world, whether we're talking US or EU or elsewhere. I mean, I know that South Korea are working on legislation. I mean, legislation like the GDPR has really taken a huge importance. I know it's a 10-year-old legislation, but it's still quite prevalent in trying to protect. Prevention we can do with our various projects, our various initiatives, be they educational or online gamified platforms or whatever. But we really, really need to take into consideration, is our law protecting us? And are our human rights being respected? And are they being understood? Particularly with the advent of AI technology. What does human rights mean there? And that's something that's preoccupying me at the moment, because we see more and more cases of AI produced images, but they are getting an original image from somewhere.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because you think about it from such a different point of view than I do, because I think about it from like cultural behavioral standpoint. And I can speak from being an American. We don't teach kids, say, critical thinking, but we don't teach them how to recognize manipulation. Like just in general, we teach like, oh, share, but sharing is caring. But it's not always. It's not just that easy. We run into you also teach kids, well, he was nice to you, so now you need to be nice to him. That reciprocity. And one of the things that predators do is they start picking up on that. They use that. They're like, the love bombing, most people know what that is. It's a pop psychology buzzword, but yeah, that's what they do. They make them feel like, hey, I gave this to you, I did this for you, you owe me. And we teach kids that. We also teach kids to listen to their elders, don't question authority. Instead, we should be teaching, and I'm very big advocate for this, with my nephew, I've always said, if there's any situation where you don't feel comfortable, I don't care what it is, I don't care who it is, leave. I don't care. We don't teach kids to do that. They have to sit down, they have to go to school, they have to listen to their authorities, they have to listen to the pastors, they have to listen to the grown-ups. So I think in a lot of ways we're setting kids up to be victims in a way by what we're teaching them. That we're not teaching them to trust their instincts, to that it's okay to say no, it's okay to not do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. One of my other things is really drives me up a wall is that when parents force their kids to hug people, and it is a cultural thing. I get that. It's like, oh, well, hug them. It's your cousin. It's like, no, if that person doesn't want, don't teach your kids that their discomfort needs to be overridden for somebody else's pleasure. Because Uncle Joe wants a hug. Like, no, kid doesn't have to hug Uncle Joe. And so things like that, I see more on the micro level of teaching kids. Like, no, don't touch people who are uncomfortable. Don't let people touch you. Having autonomy over your body, I think that's really important. And I could also go on a whole rant about the objectification of women in advertising and how that leads to sexual violence as well. That's my soapbox for the afternoon.
Yeah, I mean, again, I totally agree, and that's something that's come out in our projects as well. It's to educate how to identify what's toxic and what's non-toxic. And whilst everybody, that whole love bombing approach certainly needs to be, we certainly need to educate children how to identify the love bombing approach. The 24/7 texts, there we should certainly highlight the red flags around meeting somebody new and somebody who's suddenly going from, liking hello to an intense type relationship. And again, and I'm going to bring in the whole AI movement again, which is what I'm going to call it, but because of the move towards the agent AI, whereby we will be assisted and are being assisted currently, but we will be more and more assisted by agents online. So we will have these entities, machine entities or AI entities, models who will be assisting us. And it's taken away our autonomy, it's taking away our ability, it can potentially take away the ability to think. And whilst we weren't born into that digital era like the minors of today or the children of today, we really have to start the educational process at a very young age to alert them to the importance of human contact and the importance of human feelings and the importance of relaying what bothers them to humans like yourself, Genevieve. We certainly need to emphasize that there is nothing that is equivalent to human empathy because the systems are being developed to act like they can experience empathy, but in actual fact, it's a machine. So I think the educational process, and again, and when we worked with Save the Children on this at Seascape, they had a very good project around educational materials that they had developed for very young children from the ages of 5 upwards. Now they got huge backlash when they were trying to integrate this initially into various schools around Europe because the idea of bringing sex education to young 5-year-olds horrified the schools and the parents. But it's not about sex education, which I'm sure you will confirm here, Genevieve. It's about providing knowledge and empowering young individuals with growing minds and developing minds, what's right and what's wrong, and to listen to their gut feeling. And a red flag is a red flag. If something doesn't feel right, then we really need to educate them to act on it, either move themselves out of the situation. But of course, we have that situation whereby bad actors are targeting children at a younger and younger age. It's not humanly possible to expect them to have that same analytical approach or even attributes that we, even as adults, lack at some, at some points or at some stages in our lives. So it's really, really important that we press on that educational button and have people like you, Genevieve, going into schools or talking to young children as young as the age of 5, talking to parents, creating what is normal. because we are losing sight of what is normal. When I have a 15-year-old, and it's normal. It's been normalized for a lot of the 15, 16-year old boy group to look at porn. It's normal. But what is normal about looking at porn at the age of 15, 16? Again, we need to kind of really highlight that it is not normal to be looking at porn, because obviously looking at porn at such a young age can potentially lead for the boys or for the individuals looking at porn to create high expectations around sexual favors or whatever. But even once they get bored with that level of porn that they've been subjected to at the age of 15, well, then they can maybe even go to higher, more hardcore porn, and sometimes it can lead to them becoming abusers, because they're looking for thrills, they're looking for excitement. And if they've been looking at porn from such a young age, and 15 is a young age, then their levels of empathy decrease as they get older. And their lack of respect for women, of course, kicks in, as you've mentioned earlier on. And women are subjected to much more gender-based violence. And we have that online gender-based violence as well to cater. So there's a lot of women are being certainly subjected to a lot of abuse online.
There's one thing you said, I think it was you, Genevieve, and I want to understand better, especially in regards to kids, that we're not teaching kids to recognize when they're being manipulated. How can you teach a kid to recognize when they're being manipulated? Because I personally imagine them as that's something that's a pretty complex thing. So can you help us understand that better?
Yeah. No, I mean, and it is very complex. It's even adults don't realize when they're being manipulated or see, sales tactics, things like that. I think for kids it has to be broken down like very simple. And I always go back with kids because we're all built with a survival instinct in us as part of our primitive brain. There's a really good book written by Gavin DeBecker called The Gift of Fear. And I think that's something important is to teach kids that what they feel, and if they have like, I tell them it's their spidey sense. Like if your spidey sense feels weird or something doesn't feel right, then go with it. And that's where I start with the kids. And, for my nephew's read all my like narrative analysis books. So he's asked me a lot about that, like as a teenager, like on manipulation and stuff, which has been really great. I'm glad he was interested in that. But yeah, for kids, just being able to, if something doesn't feel right, it's okay. And to teach them that they can go, like if they have a safe person, they can go ask about it or say, hey, I don't know, this seems weird, and using the language that kids use, whatever it is. I know it changes from generation to generation. I mean, mine says words to me I've never heard. I'm like, but that's the, I mean, with kids though, and to teach them that the other thing too is to teach kids that not all grown-ups know everything. There's this very much like, oh, listen to the grown-ups, listen to the adults, they're the ones in charge. That they don't always know everything. They can be wrong. And that's okay, and you can still realize that they're wrong and be respectful about it, like, it's tough, though. I mean, there's no easy answer, and it's not gonna give it to you in, like, 2 minutes.
No, but yeah, one thing I thought of now is I do think it's important to actually parent or adult differently now than in the past. Exactly for what you're saying, because where these children are online and the world is open to them, then they're much more likely to be put in a situation where the adult doesn't know. And if they're maybe, I imagine this, yeah, that if I, as a mom, for example, had been like, no, I'm right because I'm a mom, then maybe my daughter will think, it's like that online. She'll have trouble like disconnecting. Is that like true? Can that be as well?
Yeah, I mean, it could be, it depends on the kid, but yeah, it's I don't recommend. I know sometimes it's hard raising kids, so I'm not by any means knocking parents because everybody's just trying their best, and sometimes you're just absolutely exhausted. It's just like, just because I said, just go with it. I think it's a little different for parents, and if you can make that known to your kids, like, look, I'm not going to tell you something that I think is going to harm you. So please, right now, I don't have the wherewithal to explain it. Just go with it for right now. but then have that conversation later when you're more in a headspace to do it. But, I mean, but let it be okay for your kids to ask you why and to ask the questions, like, and to say, I don't understand. I think some of it too is education around the parents as well. Angeline, I know you and I have talked about this, is also for parents to realize that this stuff happens in quote unquote, I'm going to use the good families, both parents in the house, two parent families, two income families with the resources, the support, everything, parents doing everything they can for their kids. This stuff still happens to them as well. And there is a lot of shame around that. And that, like, when I've worked with families, the first thing they say is like, well, we're a good family. There was no abuse. It doesn't always have to be abuse.
What about the global aspect? Because I personally have given up a little bit on regulation in general, right? I believe we'll get there eventually, but in the short term, I don't see it. So, well, from your experience, what can we really do globally? Because this is a global problem, and as we said, I don't know that the media always shows it that way because it gets more attention if people feel close to home. Um, what do you think? Like, I know this is a very broad question, but what can we do globally to try and really help fix this or get it better at least?
hmm I think we're starting to. I mean, just look at the three of us. We all live in three different countries having this conversation. And I'm curious to see, people who are viewing this are probably from other countries as well. So I think these global conversations are really, really important and bringing people from different cultures as well. Teresa, you look like you're having some thoughts.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. Absolutely. I think dialogue is so, so important. I think collaborative and inclusive dialogue is very important. As you said, include as many voices as possible. And I mean, education projects. I mean, there's so many different approaches. And I know that there's a lot of disappointment around the success of legislation, but we still need legislation. We still need a legal framework. So I mean, and as a human rights qualified lawyer, I would always endorse legislation and the framework that goes around that. But in parallel, I think that it's really, really important that we continue this open dialogue, that we involve as many voices as possible, particularly the voice of children. I would really emphasize the importance of the participation of children in these discussions as well. Having worked with children on various projects, their insight is extraordinary, and it's extraordinary because they have been born into a different era or they've been born into this era. And what's very interesting now, or all of those children of today, well, they will be looking at their younger counterparts in 5 years because they will have experienced something even more because of the AI explosion going on in currently. We are in constant movement, we're in constant flux, and we need to keep conversations up to speed with what's happening. I will, of course, encourage the legislative process to try to keep up as much as possible. But the figures are there, whether we have correct data or incorrect data or underreported data or whatever, we know that there is a lot of abuse happening online. We know that there's a lot of bad actors out there that are exploiting the current situation. And we we really, really have to work on that, on developing awareness on a global level. I mean, this isn't just, it's not a US issue or a European issue. It's a global issue. And I think it deserves and merits a global response, as you said.
Yeah, I'd like your thoughts on something that one of our listeners gave. And Sarah Graham, she wrote that she did a literature review for her doctorate on impact of CSAM on victims. And one thing that came up was that young people don't recognize the abuse until much later. And at the time, they felt they were in love with the offender and didn't like the intervention to stop it. That's a really good one because I know this is not about AI chatbots, but I know it's a similar problem with AI chatbots. So can we talk about that because that's a really, really good point.
Yeah, I mean, every single survivor that we've ever worked with, they were in love with their their boyfriends. They even call them digital boyfriends. The relationship starts off positively. The relationship starts off, and that is the way the relationship is manipulated by the perpetrator. It's manipulated to make it seem like it is a loving, romantic relationship. And that is how they ensnare the children. They create this bubble of security. And once they feel, and it doesn't take a lot of time, particularly with the younger children, once they feel that they have encapsulated the children within that bubble of security and dependency, there's a huge dependency element to this as well. Well, then they will go in for the kill, so to speak. But every single one of the survivors I've ever worked on any project, whether it was in recent projects or a few years back, every single one of them had an initial positive relationship with their abuser, which of course was subsequently turned. I mean, then there's these passive aggressive techniques that are used by the abusers, and of course a lot of the survivors spoke about their inability to handle these passive aggressive attacks. And one of the biggest threats was to remove that love, or that love bombing system that had developed between them. And our survivors spoke very frequently about the fear of losing. It was better to have the love, whether it's good or bad, but it's better to have it than not have it. I don't know if you've seen that as well, Genevieve. It's the acceptance of willing to do anything to maintain and retain that relationship or that important person in their lives. And the ability to say no, and the lack of ability to say no and report individuals who've been subjected to child sexual abuse. I mean, it's the question: why don't they report? Because they're threatened, because they're fearful, because. And it's that whole self-blame that's perpetuated. My fault, I shouldn't have. I remember one survivor said to me, he went outside and climbed a ladder into a treehouse, and her 12-year-old cousin was waiting at the top of the ladder. And she's repeated to me over and over again that if only I hadn't climbed that ladder. And I said, but you have every right to climb the ladder. You were just going up to the treehouse. But it's that, if only, if only, if only. So we really, really have to emphasize that the perpetrator is at fault. It is not the individual who's been abused, the survivors, or the victims. It's the perpetrator, because they're manipulating the situations to make it seem like the child is actually the one instigating contact, but they are the innocent bystanders in this whole process.
Do you or either of you see some kind of trend about the moment, or how do survivors manage to break free from this? I mean, obviously, sextortion is something different, right? Because this is some kind of threat for money, and at some point, I imagine, correct me if I'm wrong, I imagine that this escalates sextortion, because either you give the money or don't give the money. But and the other types, maybe to understand, because I would think if we understand how survivors break away, we can also help understand how to support them that, for example, that are in that situation like Sarah described.
Yeah, that's a tough question to answer because everybody's different. For some, it just gets to be too much and they escape. For others, it may be that they have a safe person that they can go to who can help them. There's no, I don't know. Theresa may have seen something different in her work, but in the survivors I've worked with, it's been different for all of them, like what that final straw is or what it is to get them out. Some of them, they don't get out on their own. They're dumped by their abuser in a, for lack of a better way to say that, or, you know, and it's tough. And, Theresa talked a little bit about the very complex emotions as well that are in there, because there is love, and they want that and they miss that. You see that in abusive relationships. There's always that honeymoon period that keeps them connected, keeps them involved, keeps them addicted. I don't That's not the best word, but keeps them on the hook.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, many survivors, they only get out when they're when it's literally they have been presented with no other option. Either the threatening by the abuser has hit just that point of no return. I know some of the survivors that we've worked with, it was literally as they were being wheeled for into the hospital after their third suicide attempt, that their parents just said, "Look, what's going on? There's something seriously not right here." And it was then and only then that their child confessed to the abuse that had been going on for 3 or 4 years. Unfortunately, many of the survivors have told us that they really only disclose when they feel they've no other choice. And that's quite distressing, because many go through the various suicidal attempts. Many of them go through self-harm. Many of them go through that mental and emotional abuse for so many years, trying to keep this a secret and trying to maintain some form of normality within the school system or even within their family unit. So that's something that, and I may have mentioned this to you before, but in Lyon, I set up an NGO when we went into schools, public, private, and international schools. And we really, really emphasized, I worked with lots of students from human rights. We really emphasized that talk to somebody. COVID-19 has developed this whole planet of loneliness. Everybody was so hooked up to their PCs, to the online system, that loneliness developed inexplicably throughout COVID-19 and has just kind of continued. So a lot of children are seeking solace or friendship or empathy or kindness or love through via the internet, and that's what's maintaining this system. A lot of people's vulnerabilities are being exploited, and as I said, many many don't disclose because they feel a certain affinity or a certain loyalty to the abuser, because they remember what it was like at the beginning and how nice the abuser was to them, or whether they were generous offline, whether they were generous online with various gifts, or generous with their time, or generous with their questions. How was your day at school? How did your tests go? Or you look nice today. It's just that we really need to encourage that within our society to have these normal everyday conversations, because a lot of the survivors that we worked with emphasized that this made their day, that there was somebody interested, that somebody just said a couple of words about, how was your day? It's such an innocuous sentence, but so loaded as well, because it carries that whole caring element of somebody is interested enough in me to ask me about my day, to comment on my experience, on my appearance, comment on how I'm interacting, usually in a very positive fashion. So, yeah, it's kind of, unfortunately, it's when they've no other choice for many of them. But what we've noticed in our interactions with young people is that they always say, and I think it'll be good news for you, Angelina, and for all of the parents out there listening, the parents, carers, or guardians, is that many do want to confide in their parents. Their parents are their first go-to. And a lot of the survivors, when they finally disclosed, it was to somebody in authority, and a lot of them were their parents. So parents shouldn't underestimate their important role within that difficult teenage adolescent period, because they are important. They are important, even though the adolescents may not show that their parents are important. We have found, and there was a recent study published I saw the other day, that there's this emphasis that children do want to turn to their parents, because that is the positive conditioning of society, that your parent is there to help you. The good parents. Yeah.
There's one last thing I want to ask you about, and this is really specific to online sexual predators. And Rebecca, who was there for the collaboration jam, had spent quite a bit of time on the dark web, just kind of, I would say, studying these groups, because they are groups that support each other quite a bit. They share a lot of information about victims and potential victims. They're very well organized as well. I think you said also as well, Theresa, your experience was if you beat one down, then if you have one organization and you manage to break it down, then in a different geography, in maybe 2 weeks later, the exact same thing will appear again, right? So this is another reason why it's so important to collaborate globally, right?
Unfortunately or fortunately, they are creatures of habit and they have communities like everybody else, whether it's on the dark web or otherwise. It's not all bad actors work together on the dark web. There is, of course, a community, but a lot of them work on an individual basis as well, as we've seen in recent case law in Northern Ireland. But yeah, it's law enforcement is experiencing quite a high demand in this area, and it's very difficult for law enforcement to be able to meet with the demand and to keep up to date in parallel with all of these new breach or violation of fundamental rights that that are covered by law. But what what do we do, and how do we ensure that the message is sent out to those bad actors that you shouldn't be doing this, because they're just increasing. Mafias are increasing online. There's this whole network of criminal activity surrounding online child sexual abuse, and it just seems to be getting bigger and bigger. And I know that some people have mentioned, a lot of the law enforcement agencies have talked about it's taken over from drug cartels because of the ability of child sexual abuse to be reused. Images can be reused over and over again on a global level, so that unfortunately maintains the abuse of the individual who may potentially have been abused at the age of 5, but they still have their images online 20 years later.
Exactly. And, just something else I wanted to add to that with those groups is that they normalize the behavior for each other. So whereas like general society is going to be like, okay, it is not okay to look at images of kids. This is not right. You need to, stop doing this, and shames them. These groups don't do that. They're like, nope, it's society's problem. It's not you. And they normalize that behavior, encourages that behavior. They're like echo chambers for each other. They're supporting each other in it. And again, like human beings have this natural, you kind of touched on this, Teresa. We are social animals. Like we have a natural tendency to want to be part of communities, to want to be part of something bigger than ourselves. And so for these perpetrators that join this group, like they're getting that social support, they're encouraged to do the behaviors that they like. It's being normalized. It's just a recipe for not great things to happen.
Yeah, and of course we have those so-called pedophile manuals as well that provide detailed guidance chapter by chapter to that online community on how to abuse children, how to get away with it, how to not be noticed. I don't know if you've probably had occasion to go through some of these pedophile manuals or so-called pedophile manuals, but it's quite distressing to see the level of advice and detail that they go into to encourage what they, as you've said, see as normal.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's just like, here's your tips and tricks, and here's a how to manual. Yeah. And they've been doing that since gosh, I think the first time I saw one was maybe 15, 20 years ago when the technology was different. It was, you know, printed out and handed, stapled together and handed out that way or mailed. And now it's sent via email instantaneously around the world.
I think that is all of this really points to we really need to work together on this. I mean, there's no other way around it. I mean, as I say, I mean, the whole reason we have Shield is to try to amplify each other's work, right? Because kids all over the world, they're using the same tools. The perpetrators are able to reach from all different countries, basically, with, I don't want to say a handful of tools, but there are maybe a handful of large tools. So the reaction also needs to be the same, right? Also kind of coming together. And as you say, talking can make a big difference, right? I like that there's a lot of news out there about it and more people are talking about it. I also don't like that it will often say there's somehow national borders to this because there aren't. And so, yeah, I'm very grateful for both of you, and also Rebecca, who's not here, but also for her and also other people. We will continue these conversations. We'll have one later in the year as well about how to support the victims, more specifically about supporting mechanism. So thank you, both of you, and anyone else who's listening who would like to get into the discussion and have these conversations. Are more than welcome, because we've seen it's complex. It's just getting bigger and bigger, and if we don't work together, then we're not going to. Police are also overwhelmed, right? So we have to support them as well. So
And
thank
police
you.
I was just going to say, and police by definition are reactive, so they're not proactive. And I'm not saying that as, a knock against police, but they don't typically get involved until a crime has happened.
I know, but there has been interest demonstrated by law enforcement to try to be a little bit more involved in the preventative side of things. I think the UK police are very progressive, as are the Dutch as well. But it's a different topic, but they're really they're really doing their best. That's for sure.
Okay, thank you to both of you, and thank you to everyone who's listened.